Along the rugged coast of Maine, the sea is both provider and predator. It feeds families with its endless harvest of cod, lobster, and haddock, but it also claims lives with sudden storms and unseen currents. Every child raised in the town of Harrington grows up with this truth. The ocean gives, and the ocean takes. Tom Gallagher understood this better than anyone. At 42, he was one of Harrington's most respected fishermen, a man whose entire life was woven into the tides. His face was etched with lines carved by wind and salt, his hands scarred from rope burns and hooks, but his eyes still carried a sharpness that came from reading the sea like scripture. He was not just another fisherman. He was the fisherman people trusted when weather turned or engines failed. Younger men sought his advice on where to set their nets, and old-timers nodded with respect when they saw his vessel return heavy with catch. Even on shore, people described Tom as married to the sea, half in jest, but they knew it wasn't far from the truth. That devotion was tied to his boat, the Marion Belle, named after his wife, Marion. It was a sturdy vessel built for solo work. The paint had faded from a proud navy blue to a weather-worn slate, but the hull was strong, the engine reliable, and the deck always kept in order. Locals often said you could spot the Marion Belle miles away just by the way it cut through the waves. Steady, determined, like the man who steered her. Tom's routine was as predictable as the tide. He rose before dawn, brewed strong coffee, and walked the quiet docks while most of the town still slept. By 7, his gear was loaded, nets neatly coiled, bait boxes stacked, everything in its place. He wasn't a man for idle talk. His nods and brief greetings carried more weight than long conversations. His neighbors joked that he trusted the sea more than he trusted people. Tom never argued. On the morning he vanished, the harbor was calm. The September sun rose pale over the water, casting long streaks of gold across the tide. Seagulls circled lazily overhead. The conditions could not have been better for fishing. No storms forecast, no winds to complicate the journey. Several neighbors watched as Tom prepared his boat. He worked with his usual precision, double-checking knots, tightening ropes, securing fuel. His wife Marion stood at the dock, arms folded against the chill, watching him with the quiet mix of pride and worry she always felt. He promised her he'd be home by evening with a good catch. He had made that promise countless times before. At 7:15 a.m., the Marion Belle pulled away from the dock. Tom lifted a hand in farewell to the harbor master, who raised his own in return. The boat's engine hummed steadily as it pushed into open water, its silhouette shrinking against the horizon. To those who saw him leave, it looked like every other morning of his life. By mid-afternoon, Tom's voice came crackling over the radio. The message was brief, delivered in his calm, measured tone, but edged with something unusual. Heading further out, water looked strange today. Then silence. No one who heard it knew quite what to make of it. Tom was not a man given to exaggeration. Strange was not a word he used lightly. Still, most assumed it was nothing more than an offhand remark, perhaps about a shifting current or the glint of light on the waves. But Tom never returned. By dusk, when the Marion Belle failed to appear at the dock, worry spread. Calls went unanswered. His wife stood at the harbor long after nightfall, her eyes fixed on the empty horizon, convinced his boat would appear at any moment. By midnight, the Coast Guard was notified. At dawn, the search began. For days, the ocean was scoured. Patrol boats traced his usual routes, their spotlights sweeping the water. Helicopters combed the coastline, their engines droning above the waves. Divers descended where sonar showed promising shapes. But each time they surfaced empty-handed. The search drew in locals as well. Volunteer boats joined the effort, their crews scanning for flotsam, debris, anything that might point to Tom's fate. Fishermen who had known him for decades worked side by side with strangers, unwilling to accept that one of their own had simply disappeared. But the sea gave nothing back, not a plank of the Marion Belle, not a coil of rope, not a life vest or a buoy. It was as though both man and vessel had dissolved into the vastness. At home, Marion kept the porch light burning every night. Neighbors brought food and tried to console her, but nothing filled the silence. She replayed his last words again and again in her head. Water looked strange today. What had he meant? What had he seen? By the end of the second week, the Coast Guard issued its final statement. Thomas Gallagher and the vessel Marion Bell, presumed lost at sea, cause unknown. The words felt clinical, detached, an ending without explanation. But Harrington could not let it rest so easily. Tom was too skilled, too experienced, too cautious to be swallowed by calm seas. Around town, whispers began to grow. Some said a rogue wave had taken him. Others suggested foul play, muttering about rival fishermen or smugglers using hidden routes. A few insisted there were places in the ocean where compasses spun and ships vanished, the sea swallowing men whole without leaving evidence. Still, no proof surfaced, and so the story settled into legend. The fisherman who went out on a calm September morning and vanished into nothing. His wife left waiting at the window. His neighbors left with unanswered questions. His boat, his body, his life, all erased by the same sea that had once sustained him. It was as if both man and vessel had slipped beneath the sea without leaving a trace. The official search ended after 2 weeks. But for Marion Gallagher, the waiting never did. Every evening, as the lighthouse cast its sweeping beam across the harbor, she lit the lamp in her front window. It was a small ritual, a signal for a husband who never returned. Neighbors noticed the glow each night, soft against the dark, and it became a symbol of devotion, of denial, of the unbearable ache of absence. For the first few months, Marion still walked to the dock at dawn, watching the horizon as if expecting the Marion Bell to appear with Tom waving from the bow. She carried his last words with her everywhere, repeating them like a riddle, heading further out. Water looked strange today. What had he seen? What had unsettled a man who never exaggerated about the sea? The town grieved with her. Tom was not just another fisherman. He was part of Harrington's identity. In the first year, the community rallied, hosting fundraisers, printing flyers, offering rewards for information. Boats went out farther than usual, crews scanning waves long after the Coast Guard had declared the case closed. But the sea gave back nothing. As the seasons turned, whispers began. Some insisted Tom had been claimed by a freak storm, swallowed in minutes with no chance to signal for help. Others leaned toward foul play. They pointed to the missing boat. Why had no wreckage ever surfaced? Smuggling routes, they muttered, or a fight at sea. Maybe Tom had stumbled into something he wasn't supposed to see. Theories multiplied as hope thinned. By the third year, fishermen avoided the waters where he'd last reported in. The spot earned a new name, the Drown Patch. Men swore their compasses spun there. That sonar glitched without warning. That engine stalled for no reason. No one liked to linger. The Marion Bell's last known position became a place marked on maps, not as fishing grounds, but as cursed waters. Even beyond Harrington, the case refused to fade. Online forums devoted to mysteries and vanishings picked up Tom's story. Posters connected his final words to every theory imaginable. Some argued he'd been caught in a rogue wave, one of those sudden walls of water that appear without warning. Others believed pirates, yes, even in modern waters, had taken the boat. A few compared it to Bermuda Triangle anomalies, pointing to strange disappearances across the Atlantic and weaving Tom into a pattern of maritime legends. Marion avoided the internet. She preferred silence to speculation. Her grief was quiet, but it carried weight. She left Tom's clothes folded in his dresser, his boots by the door, his fishing cap on the hook. The lamp in the window remained lit, even when storms rattled the glass. To her, extinguishing it would mean surrender. The town held a memorial service in the second year. The church was full, the air thick with salt and sorrow, but without a body. Closure remained elusive. Marion sat in the front pew, her hands trembling as she held Tom's old compass. When the pastor spoke the words, "laid to rest," she closed her eyes. Knowing it wasn't true, her husband was not resting. He was missing. 8 years stretched on. Children grew into adults who only knew Tom as a story. The younger fisherman learned his name not from working beside him, but from cautionary tales told at the docks. Don't push too far into the drowned patch. Remember Gallagher. His absence became a warning, and yet, for Marion, time never dulled the wound. Every creak of the floorboards in the night, every shift of the tide outside her window, made her think for a heartbeat that Tom was coming home. Then the silence reminded her otherwise. Daniel McCarthy, a fellow fisherman who had once crewed with Tom, put it best during an interview years later. The sea doesn't lose boats like that. Not without leaving a scar. Something happened out there, and I don't think we'll ever know what. His words echoed what many in Harrington already believed. Tom's disappearance wasn't a simple accident. It was a mystery the ocean was determined to keep, and so the years dragged by, marked by memorial services with fewer attendees, by Marion's nightly lamp glowing against the dark, by an ocean that gave no answers, until one morning, after nearly a decade of silence, the tide shifted. On a rocky beach not far from Harrington, battered by storms and forgotten by most, a group of teenagers stumbled on something strange. Wedged against the rocks, weather-beaten but unmistakable, was a fishing vessel. Its paint was faded, its wood cracked, but the name scrawled across the hull was still legible through the salt and decay. The Marion Belle, for 8 years. The sea had kept its silence, until now. Storms are nothing unusual along the Maine coast, but the one that rolled in that September was the kind people talk about for years. Winds howled through the harbor. Waves crashed against the seawall, and lightning split the sky in sheets of blinding white. When it finally passed, it left behind uprooted trees, shredded docks, and a shoreline littered with driftwood. But it also left behind something else, something the town of Harrington thought it would never see again. The morning after the storm, a group of local teenagers hiked out to a rocky beach known for collecting wreckage. They were looking for souvenirs, buoys, lobster traps, anything they could drag home as trophies of the storm. Instead, as they rounded a bend, they froze. Jutting against the rocks was the battered hull of a fishing vessel. Its paint was almost gone, stripped by salt and time. The wood was warped, eaten away in places. Yet the outline of the boat was still clear. At first they thought it was just another piece of forgotten wreckage, until one of them brushed away a layer of seaweed and saw the faint, faded letters carved into the stern. The Marion Belle. The name sent them running. Within hours, word spread through town like fire. Crowds gathered at the shoreline, staring in disbelief. For 8 years, the Marion Belle had been nothing more than a ghost story. Now here it was. Returned by the sea, Coast Guard officials quickly moved in, cordoning off the beach. The vessel was dragged to a more stable inlet, its hull creaking as if groaning under the weight of its own secrets. Reporters arrived before the salt had even dried, cameras flashing as they captured the first sight of the boat that had carried Tom Gallagher to his disappearance. The exterior told a story of years adrift. The hull was cracked. Barnacles clung in thick patches, and seaweed trailed like ribbons from the rudder. The wheelhouse glass was shattered. Its frame twisted, nets dangled in tatters, rusted chains clinking softly as the boat rocked in the shallows. But what unsettled investigators most was the fact that the Marion Belle had not sunk. Somehow, through nearly a decade of storms, it had remained afloat enough to drift back to shore. Inside, the scene was haunting. The gear Tom had once loaded with such precision was still there, though ruined by time. Rusted hooks hung from the walls, coils of rope lay stiff with salt, and buckets of bait had long since dissolved into unrecognizable sludge. Yet remarkably, the cabin itself had remained intact, its door swollen but sealed enough to protect what was inside. When investigators forced it open, the air that escaped was stale, heavy with mildew. They found a small table bolted to the floor, its surface warped, and above it, a shelf where personal items still clung precariously. A compass, green with corrosion, a thermos, its paint flaking, and beneath it all, a leather-bound journal, water-stained but still intact. The journal belonged to Thomas Gallagher. His name was scratched on the inside cover in his bold handwriting. The first pages were ruined, ink smeared into indecipherable lines. But deeper in the book, some entries survived. They were short, written in hurried strokes, describing the days before his disappearance, notes about the weather, observations about the water, and then the final entry. The ink was faint, the page warped, but the words were clear enough to chill the air around the investigators as they read them aloud. "Not alone out here." The phrase spread like wildfire. Reporters seized on it, broadcasting headlines across the country. What had Tom meant? Who, or what, had been with him on the open sea? Theories multiplied instantly. Some believed he had encountered smugglers. Others whispered about ghost ships or supernatural presences on the water. Fishermen, hardened men who had spent their lives battling the Atlantic, found themselves uneasy. More than one admitted that in their long nights at sea, they too had felt watched. But the journal was not the only discovery. As crews examined the boat further, they noticed the deck had been crudely reinforced in places, boards nailed down at odd angles. When they pried them open, they realized there was more hidden within the Marion Bell than Tom's belongings. Beneath the deck lay a compartment no one had known about, sealed crudely as though someone had been desperate to keep it hidden. Investigators peered inside, their flashlights catching something pale and irregular, half buried in salt-crusted debris. Bones. The moment was frozen in silence. Animal bones. Perhaps, or so they hoped, but even in the beam of a flashlight, some fragments looked disturbingly human. The crowd outside the cordon pressed closer, voices rising with rumors. Reporters shouted questions. The officials said nothing, only covered the opening and ordered the area cleared for Marion Gallagher. The return of the boat was no blessing. When she was shown the journal, her hands shook as she traced Tom's writing. "Not alone out here," she whispered, tears streaking her face. Whatever her husband had faced, he had tried to leave her a message, but it was the hidden compartment, sealed away for 8 years, that now gripped the investigation, because what lay beneath the deck was not just debris, it was evidence, and what lay beneath the deck would cast the case in an even darker light. The Marion Bell was no longer just a vessel. It was evidence, pulled from the rocks, hauled onto dry land, and sealed beneath tarps. The boat became the center of a forensic storm. Investigators, journalists, and curious locals all crowded to glimpse the secrets the ocean had returned after nearly a decade. At first glance, the boat looked like a relic of its time at sea, weathered, warped, its hull encrusted with barnacles. But as forensic teams examined it closely, strange details emerged. The salt patterns along the hull suggested something odd. The Marion Bell had not been fully submerged for 8 years as many had assumed. Instead, there were marks, clean breaks in the layers of salt and algae, that indicated the boat had been alternately exposed and hidden, as though it had drifted, sheltered, perhaps even docked, before being released again. It hadn't simply wandered the ocean aimlessly. Something had preserved it, at least for a time. Then came the compartment. It had been crudely sealed beneath the deck with mismatched nails and splintered planks. Investigators believed it wasn't part of the original design, but added later, hastily. With whatever material had been on hand, the effort wasn't to reinforce the boat. It was to hide something. When the boards were pried away, the truth emerged. Inside lay bones. At first, the fragments seemed jumbled, mixed with seaweed and debris. Some were clearly animal remains, perhaps fish or birds, but among them were bones that no one could mistake, ribs, long bones. The curvature of a skull fractured by time and pressure, human remains, and not just one set. There were too many. Forensic specialists worked meticulously, cataloging each piece. Within days, DNA confirmed what the town had dreaded. Some of the bones belonged to Thomas Gallagher. The fisherman who had vanished 8 years earlier had, in some way, returned, but the shock did not end there. Other bones belonged to a second person. DNA tests ran against local and national databases came back inconclusive. No match. whoever the second individual was. Their identity remained unknown. The revelation fractured the narrative until now. The story had been one of a fisherman lost at sea, but with two bodies on the boat. Questions multiplied. Who was the other person? Had Tom brought someone aboard without telling anyone? Had someone forced themselves onto the Marion Bell? And most disturbing of all, had Tom been alone when he vanished? The journal seemed to provide answers, though they only deepened the unease. As experts restored the waterlogged pages, more entries came to light. Between smeared lines about tides and weather were passages that unsettled, even hardened investigators. One entry described lantern lights where no boats should be, faint glows that moved across the horizon long after nightfall. Another mentioned voices in the fog, men calling my name, though no vessel could be seen. The most chilling note came days before the final entry. Someone is following. Not a ship I know, no flag, just shadows. If the words were to be believed, Tom had not been alone in his final days. He had been stalked. Speculation exploded. Some insisted this proved foul play. Smugglers or pirates who had confronted Tom and claimed his vessel. Others argued the second body could have been a stowaway, someone Tom had picked up in secret. But among the fishermen of Harrington, a darker interpretation took hold. They whispered that Tom had encountered something older, stranger, a presence on the sea that watched from the fog and left no witnesses. For Marion, the discoveries were unbearable. Seeing the journal was like hearing her husband's voice reach out from beyond the waves. Yet the entries offered no comfort. They were not love notes or mundane reflections. They were warnings. Descriptions of fear written by a man who rarely admitted to it. The investigators pressed on, but the evidence only fueled more questions. The salt lines on the boat, the crude compartment, the second body, the journal entries about lantern lights and voices in the fog. None of it fit neatly into a single explanation. In the end, the official report used cautious language. Remains identified as Thomas Gallagher and an unidentified second individual. Cause of death undetermined. Vessel shows signs of tampering post-disappearance. But the public wanted more. At the docks, fishermen swapped stories late into the night. Some claimed the Marion Bell had been taken by smugglers who used it for their own purposes before abandoning it. Others believed Tom had stumbled upon something supernatural. A phantom ship, a ghost crew, forces that had long haunted mariners. The second body, they argued, was proof that whoever had been with him had never left the boat alive. Daniel McCarthy, Tom's old friend, said what many were thinking but few dared to speak aloud. He wasn't alone out there, and whatever found him, it wasn't meant to be seen. For Marion, the lamp in the window stayed lit, but now it burned not just for her husband. It burned for the questions that would never be answered. The Marion Bell had returned, but the truth remained adrift. And as people stood on the beach staring at the boat that had defied time and tide, one question haunted them all. Did Thomas Gallagher encounter something criminal at sea, or something far stranger? The return of the Marion Bell did not bring closure. If anything, it fractured the community, splitting the town of Harrington into two camps. Those who believed the explanation was human, and those who whispered it was something far stranger. In one corner were the practical men, hardened fishermen who saw the second body as proof of foul play. To them, Tom must have crossed paths with smugglers or criminals on the water. The hidden compartment, the tampered deck, the bones, all of it spoke of human hands. Violence carried out in the fog. It's simple, one dock worker insisted at the bar. He got in the way of something he shouldn't have seen. They took his boat, used it, then ditched it when they were done. But others weren't so sure. The journal entries lingered like fog over the case. Lantern lights where no boats should be. Men calling my name from the fog. For many, those words were impossible to shake. Smugglers don't whisper your name in the dark, one fisherman muttered. That was something else. Supernatural theories spread like wildfire. Some swore the Marion Bell had been taken by a ghost ship. An old mariner's tale of vessels crewed by the dead, cursed to roam the ocean forever, stealing souls from the living. Others said Tom had stumbled into cursed waters, a patch of sea where compasses spin and time folds. The second body, they argued, belonged to someone taken years before, trapped in the same cycle of disappearance. Marion Gallagher wanted none of it. She refused interviews, declined television specials, and kept the journal locked away in a drawer no one else could touch. Neighbors said she never read past the final entry. To her, the words, "not alone out here," were not mystery, but torment. She lit her lamp in the window still, though now it felt less like hope and more like remembrance. Meanwhile, Harrington changed. The stretch of ocean where Tom vanished was no longer just fishing grounds. It became myth. Men avoided the drowned patch, steering their boats wide even when it meant smaller catches. Those who dared to cross it told stories of radios hissing into static, compasses that spun uselessly, engines that stuttered for no reason. "I've been fishing these waters for 30 years," said Daniel McCarthy, Tom's old friend, "and I've never felt anything like that place. It's wrong. The sea doesn't feel like itself there." The internet seized on the case. Forums devoted to maritime mysteries dissected every detail. Some argued the second body proved a secret rendezvous. Tom had agreed to meet someone out there, maybe for business, maybe for something darker. Others claimed the boat had been pulled into a network of hidden currents, washing through places no map recorded, only to resurface years later. Still others pointed to patterns, linking the Marion Belle to disappearances across the Atlantic, building maps of cursed waters and ghost routes. Videos with millions of views speculated on everything from drug running to supernatural abductions. Comment sections filled with debates. Was Tom a victim of crime? Or had he truly encountered something that defied explanation? For Harrington, the theories brought no comfort. They lived with the truth of absence, with the boat that had returned without its captain, with a journal that asked more questions than it answered. Then came the final twist. A year after the Marion Belle washed ashore, another fisherman out of Harrington reported something strange. He had been working the edge of the drowned patch, his radio set to the usual frequency, when a voice cut through the static. It was faint, warped by interference, but clear enough to freeze him in place. Heading further out, "Water looks strange today." The exact words Tom Gallagher had spoken before he vanished 8 years earlier. The fisherman swore it wasn't a recording. The tone, the cadence, it was Tom, alive, calling from somewhere out at sea. The message repeated once. Then the radio went dead. No trace of the transmission was ever found. When word reached Harrington, the town fell into silence. Some dismissed it as a cruel coincidence, interference from old equipment, or a prank, but others whispered that the sea was still speaking, that Tom's voice was trapped somewhere between waves and eternity, carried endlessly across the waters he had once called home. For Marion, the report was one more wound. She said nothing publicly, but neighbors noticed she stopped lighting the lamp in her window soon after. And so the legacy of Tom Gallagher became legend. His boat returned, battered but intact. His journal revealed voices in the fog. His bones lay hidden beside a stranger's, and his voice, or something that sounded like it, still haunted the radios of those who dared to fish near the drowned patch. The ocean had taken him, but in the end, it had given something back. Not answers, not closure, just fragments. A journal, a boat, a whisper on the waves. Because sometimes the sea does not return what it takes, until it wants to leave behind a secret.